Well, welcome if we haven't met. My name is James Kessler. I'm one of the pastors here on staff. Glad to be with you again this morning as we continue our study, the book of Mark. We're in Mark chapter 5. Look, it is a heavy and interesting text that we're in this morning. And in part because the focus of it is on evil, what it looks like, and how we overcome it. This week, I saw a shirt. It was last week. I saw a shirt here in town. And from the back of it, it said, "Kill your neighborhood pedophile." And then on the front of it, in smaller letters, it said, "Kill your neighborhood pedophile." And it was interesting to me because it just pointed to the fact that we are so lost when it comes to understanding what evil is, how to confront it, what to do about it. It made me recognize this, that evil is something we want to be able to identify and say that we know what it is. But when we do, we get completely lost. And that in fact, if we think about evil the way that the Bible does, the way that we'll see it this morning, which is that it's a dominion. It has an agenda. It has a goal. And that goal is to unwork God's good world, to unravel it. And when we see that that's the goal of evil, here's one thing we're going to discover, and this is what makes this particularly difficult this morning. Both the things we identify as evil and the ways in which we try to fight them, both often unweave and unwork God's created world. In other words, we are, as always, part of the problem and part of the solution. So as we look at the text this morning, one thing we're going to recognize is that if we're going to define evil, and we're going to see its agenda, we're also going to see that Jesus fights, and we have to learn how to fight like him. Jesus fights. We have to learn to fight like him. From Mark chapter 5, verses 1 through 20. Let me read it to you. So they came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gerasenes. And by the way, just bear in mind, last week we were, on the boat in the storm. At the end of everything, everybody's terrified. They're afraid of the storm. They're more afraid of the guy who can calm the storm. And immediately after that, he sets foot here in this region. And what's going to happen is very similar. There's going to be some fear, but it's Jesus' power that makes people even more afraid. So here's what happens. When Jesus stepped out of the boat, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit. He lived among the tombs. No one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain. For he had often been bound with shackles and chains, but he wrenched the chains apart and broke the shackles in pieces. No one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and on the mountains, he was always crying out and cutting himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from afar, he ran and fell down before him, and crying out with a loud voice, he said, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you, or I request from you, or I demand from you, I long from you. God, do not torment me." For he was saying to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." And Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" And he replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." So he's borrowing the language of the Roman army, right? Thousands, in other words. And he begged him earnestly not to send him out of the country. Now, a great herd of pigs was feeding there on the hillside, and they begged him, saying, "Send us into the pigs, let us enter them." So he gave them permission, and the unclean spirits came out and entered the pigs, and the herd, numbering some 2,000, rushed down the steep bank into the sea and drowned. The herdsmen fled and told it in the city and in the country, and the people came to see what it was that had happened, and they came to Jesus and saw the demon-possessed man, the one who had the legion, sitting there clothed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. Those who had seen it described to them what had happened to the demon-possessed man and to the pigs, and they began to beg Jesus to depart from their region. As he was getting into the boat, the man who had been possessed with demons begged him that he might be with him. And he did not permit him, but said, "Go home to your friends. Tell them how much the Lord has done for you, how he's had mercy on you." And he went away and began to proclaim in the Decapolis, or the 10 towns, how much Jesus had done for him. And everyone marveled. Well, Jesus does give a reason for why he'd come to earth. And it's in the book of John. And it says, as you see here from 1 John 3:8, the reason the Son of God appeared was to destroy the works of the devil. This is what he does. So how does he do it? Well, we're going to talk about it really in 3 ways that tell us the way that Christianity is built to fight evil. It is built to push back against evil. What it does is it exposes evil, it suffers evil, and it treads evil underfoot. Those are the 3 things we're going to see. The exposing of evil, the suffering of it, and the treading upon it, right? So first, Jesus exposes, right? Christianity helps us understand what evil is here in these first verses. So it's important to know where he's ministering, the region of the Gerasenes. So it might not mean anything to you, but I'm going to set the stage this way. The region of the Gerasenes was like one of those less desirable places for religious people. In other words, it was a place where you would say, okay, if you're spiritual, if you're godly, this is not a place where you go. This is not where you live. It's very unclean. It wasn't known for keeping the law, right? So you've got an unclean region, and then it's so unclean that you've got these unclean animals being herded. They're everywhere, pigs. So the unclean animal in the unclean place, and then in fact, within that place, the man is in an unclean district. He's here among the tombs. So a man who's unclean, in a place that's unclean, and Jesus enters in and finds him. It's a pretty stunning picture, and we're supposed to see this and recognize this man who is he's pitiful. Mark, more than anybody else, captures the full picture of who he is. He's crying out. He can't even wear the clothes that he should wear for comfort, right? He can't even be comforted by comfort. He's breaking chains. He's running around. He's lost his mind. He's been rejected, which leads to further suffering, which leads to further rejection. It's this cycle of pain. Every structure of thriving is gone. Familial, communal, religious. He has nothing. He's just been left out here. Now, as we read that, you might be tempted to say, well, isn't this just kind of garden variety mental illness? Is he schizophrenic? Is he, what's happening here, right? But that kind of fails on 2 counts, all right? One is the roots of psychiatry had already been well established in this day and age, hundreds of years before this moment, right? The Greco-Roman world understood the concept of mental illness. They could distinguish between them, all right? The other thing that's important to note is that he's obviously displaying more than ordinary traits. This is supernatural. He's breaking chains. He can't be held down. And then, of course, there's the demon speaking, all of that, which tells you there's something else going on here. So we shouldn't minimize this. On the other hand, I do think it's important for us to see the connection that both this kind of suffering, which is common in some ways to us all, that all of us, none of our brains work exactly the way they're supposed to, okay? Brokenness touches everything. The effect of sin in the world is connected to everything. It's the crack in the windshield that moves out, right? There's a common root here, whether it's mental illness, is some component of what he's experiencing or what you experience, or this demon possession, it all has its root in this dominion of evil in its work, okay? They're all connected to some degree. One other reason why I tell you that is because I really want to encourage you. Those of you who are in fields where you're dealing with the mentally ill, I want to encourage you. I am so thankful to know it is a great reason for us to have Christians who are in the psychiatric sciences, who are counselors, frankly, who are cops, who tend to be like the first mental illness experts on the scene, for good or for ill. That's who they are. That's their job, right? All of you who work in those worlds, in the social services, you're dealing with people who are experiencing brokenness in intense ways. So carry on. I'm deeply encouraged by that. Christians need to be in those places. Now, what happens here? Jesus is entering into this place, and he's kind of showing us that the way of dealing with evil in the kind of common and everyday world then isn't going to be good enough. Jesus walks into a place that's unclean, and he just strolls right in. He walks into a place that's dangerous. They tried to chain this guy up, and he's entirely fine. Jesus is showing that the ways of dealing with evil are not sufficient. And in fact, what he's showing us is that you and I, when we are dealing with evil, instead of casting evil out, we cast it away, right? So whether you're religious or you're not religious, what we like to do is to redistrict evil instead of fighting it. We're scorekeepers at heart. We do this by our kind of comparative virtue, right? This is the way that we do it. In general, what we like to do is we like to say, well, this person's evil or this thing is evil, or maybe the thing I'm doing is evil, but they're more evil, right? So the internet right now is powered by comparative virtue. Everybody's saying that person, that party, that organization, that kind of ideology is totally hypocritical, more hypocritical than we are, right? And the other side says, no, you're more hypocritical. Everybody breathlessly wants to prove that they're more virtuous. It powers our television shows, the ones that are most popular, where you're watching and you know somebody's not as virtuous as they say they are, and the whole show is waiting for it to be unmasked. We love that, right? We like to enjoy kind of seeing that sort of thing played out. The sins of our neighbors that we most like to gossip about are the ones where we can say, oh, you think you know them? Let me tell you the real them, right? We like to uncover it. Why? Because we like to cast evil safely outside the lines of our own hearts. That's why. It's the reason why some of us struggle deeply in relationship. Because we're constantly trying to prove who's more at fault. Imagine a marriage or a close relationship, not yours, of course, because this would never happen in your home, where you're constantly trying to see who's more at fault for what. Right? That's how we define evil. You did this, yes, but I did this more recently. You did that, no, but that wasn't as bad as the thing that I did. Comparative virtue. The best we seem to be able to do is to kind of limit evil or redistrict it. But this is a problem, and Jesus is showing that actually he's going to expose it. It makes me think of Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who is the philosopher, the Russian philosopher who was jailed in the Gulag for being anti-Soviet. And while he was there, he wrote about the human condition, because that's what you do when you're in the Gulag, right? You think about the human condition. And he basically wrote about the danger of seeing evil as being external, out there. Here's what he says. It's on the screen. If only it were so simple to see evil that way. If only there were evil people somewhere insidiously committing evil deeds, and it were necessary only to separate them from the rest of us and to destroy them. But the line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being. And who is willing to destroy a piece of their own heart? That's the challenge. If I expose evil, I expose myself. So I don't expose all the evil. Just the little bit that makes the other person look more guilty and me look more innocent. Jesus flies in the face of that, right? He shows up and he's like, no, I'm going to show it as it is. I'm going to deal with it. I'm going to come into the place that you say is off limits. I'm going to come into the place that is dangerous. I'm going to come to the person who has been chained up or left out, and I'm going to show you that there's something better than being more innocent than someone else or less guilty than the person that you don't love. And by the way, if you want to know if you're doing this, if you're choosing one of these other ways of dealing with evil, comparative virtue. Last week, you remember we talked about God will never give us more than we can handle, and we said that's not true. Let me give you another phrase to not say anymore. All right? Here it is. What kind of a person does whatever? What kind of person does that? And when you tend to say that, you tend to say that to just the kind of person who would say that, or just the kind of person who would do that, because they tend to be somebody who has so hurt you and bothered you that you're like, you are not even human. You have an uncommon kind of evil, right? Christianity says, look, we're not going to scoreboard our relationships. We're not gonna live by being less guilty or more innocent than someone else. That's not gonna be our sense of value. Instead, we're gonna do what Christianity does. It's a third way of this, and it says, implicate oneself. Christianity implicates itself. Christianity says, guilty, you don't know the half of it. You don't know the beginning of it. There's a verse that we love to use, especially when we're talking about how other people need to hear it. Here it is. For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. I feel like it would have helped us if Paul had said, meaning you, meaning me. Any attempt to deal with evil has to start by embracing our own culpability. The reason why the shirt fails is because the person wearing it pretends that they can cover themselves in the virtue of not being someone else. That's not enough. It's not enough. We need something more. Incriminate yourself. Christians, we tend to look at Christianity as an obsession with sin. Why are you guys so obsessed with sin? But the more that we're willing to see what the scriptures have to say about evil and the fact that it resides even in our own hearts, the more honest we're able to be about it and to deal with it appropriately, to deal with it, not to ignore it, not to minimize it, not to pretend it doesn't exist. Here's Bonhoeffer. Today we're talking about imprisoned people, apparently. Bonhoeffer has something else to say. There's no one who does good, not even one, warns the psalmist. That's another one for the bumper sticker. A fact amply attested by a parade of illustrious biblical figures. One by one, the great heroes of the Bible have their flaws pointed out quite explicitly. Abraham is a coward, betrays his wife. Moses is presumptive in striking the rock, and that's the least we could say about Moses, right? Let's be honest, right? David is an adulterer and a manipulator, also a killer. Peter is impulsive. Paul kills Christians for a living and calls himself the greatest of sinners. Or we can go with Francis Spufford. I like this one. Of all things, Christianity isn't supposed to be about gathering up the good people and excluding the bad people for the very single reason that there aren't any good people. Now, I'm not saying we don't have any good in us, okay? I'm saying that none of you, not even your pastor, this may shock you, can be separated by virtue of their goodness from bad people. We are still needy for grace. So why is it that Christianity can enter a place like this and deal with evil in an unclean zone? It's because it doesn't insist on its own lack of culpability, but it says we are sinners saved by grace, and therefore we can enter into a conversation about evil, and we don't have to fear exposing it in all its ghastliness because there's a Savior. You can expose evil when you know that someone has suffered that evil. Well, let's talk about that. Verses 8 through 13, there's this great event, right? The question is, what in the world is going on here? Jesus speaks. He tells the demon to come out. The demon doesn't immediately come out. As a matter of fact, The scriptures kind of insist that Jesus had said it more than once. Get out of there. Really, I mean, get out. The demon didn't get out. Is that because Jesus wasn't strong enough? No. As a matter of fact, the demon believes he's strong enough. The demon says, don't send us out of here, right? So what's Jesus doing? He's giving us an opportunity to see something. What's he doing? Jesus then sends the demons into the pigs. Why? If you're writing your own Bible, this is one of those times where you would tap the writer on the shoulder and say, you know what? I like everything before the pigs part. Can we just take the pigs part out? It's much neater. The story makes much more sense. You don't have to deal with the people that love pigs, right? But right now in the room, there are people who are like, but pigs are so stinking cute. They're delicious, but they're so cute too. Why would we kill them, right? And I understand that. So the question is why? Why does Jesus do this? Why does he make it a point of doing it? Why doesn't he doesn't make the demons leave until there's an opportunity to kill some pigs? Why? This is a great theological vision for us. Killing pigs is going to be one of your favorite things after this, okay? Here's why. I want you to think about the man who is tormented by these demons. And I want you to recognize that what Jesus does in this moment is he validates the real, very real harm that took place to this man. And as a matter of fact, he accounts for it. When you see the demons leave and they go into the pigs and drive the pigs into the water, everybody watching could say, that's what was in him. That's what happened to him. That's the pain. That's the torment. That's evil in all of its hideousness. If the demons just leave, if they just go, and there's nothing else that happens, the man may be in his right mind, but I think there's really a moment where you wonder exactly what happened. In the 2nd century, there was one of the main heresies that struck the church. It wasn't about the supernatural. It wasn't about people saying, look, this born of a virgin thing, the supernatural thing, let's get rid of it. It was actually an objection to Jesus' humanity. What the upper crust, cosmopolitan, Greco-Roman Christian converts were having trouble with was the fact that Jesus could be suffering like any old human being. And the reason is because in the Greco-Roman culture, you wanted to aspire to be like the gods and not suffer. They were the examples of perfection in humanity. The Platonic forms were expressed in this glorious image of what it meant to be a human and to triumph over evil. There was no sense in which triumphing over evil meant you had to suffer it. So Marcion in 126 AD tries to create a Bible without Jesus' humanly suffering, and rightly so, he's convicted as a heretic. This is the scandal of the cross. We see the demons go into the pigs because somebody has to pay a price for that pain. There has to be an accounting for it. Now, if I said to you, listen, you tell me a story about some evil thing that happened to you, and I say, hey, I feel your pain. Now, that can be a good thing, right? Who likes the expression, I feel your pain? It can be useful. It's okay. Some of you are like, I hate that all the time. Okay, but look, you can say, I feel your pain. That's great. But what if you say it this way? What if you say, I feel your pain. Now it's time to get over it. Now whatever empathy points you want are gone, right? I feel your pain because you told me. Now get over it. It's done, right? What the cross does, the scandal of the crucifixion, Jesus suffering in bodily form, is it says, there has to be an accounting. There has to be a payment. Something has to be done about this. We see this hideous power displayed. And the cross is a great opportunity. The pigs going into the water remind us of the penalty that has to exist for evil. That you can't just disperse it. It has to lay a penalty somewhere. In a courtroom, if you are convicted of some significant crime, at your sentencing, sometimes there will be something called a victim impact statement. Hopefully none of you have ever had to give one of these. But it essentially says, this is how that crime hurt me. And you have a chance to say it, because what we've realized is people need an opportunity to talk about what the pain is. But there's something else that happens. Sometimes there's what's called an allocution. Now, I'm not looking at the lawyers in the room because I don't want them to correct me. So I'm just going to say, sometimes there's what's called an allocution. And an allocution is an opportunity for the person who is guilty to take responsibility. They talk about their crime. Sometimes it can be a part of a plea bargain. They're saying, here's what I did. Here's what I did. Now, in Christian theology, there's a victim statement that's read. And some of us read it all the time. We confess our sins or we confess the hurt that's going on. Lord, I'm in pain. But Jesus is the one who makes the victim's pain known. But there's also an allocution. And here's the thing, Jesus reads that too. Not just the one who suffers. But he takes the penalty, not the responsibility, but the penalty for that sin and puts it on his shoulders. Why do we need to see these demons driven into pigs? Why is Jesus insistent on this? It's because he says if you're going to deal with evil, there must be a payment, and only one person can do justice to what evil is and end it. And you and I must see that in Jesus. We must see what he does, because here's what happens. When Jesus dies on the cross, something tremendous in the reading of that allocution, the taking upon himself the sin, he becomes the demoniac. He's let outside the camp. He's left in an unclean place. Psalm 22, Jesus embodies it. He's the one forsaken. My God, why have you forsaken me? He becomes the one forsaken. 1,000? How about millions and billions of sins placed on his shoulders? He's the greater sufferer. Jesus becomes the greater sufferer. He bears the greater pain. He's the one who's cast into the waters. He's the one who suffers. And not only that, Galatians 3:13, which is one to write down in your notes, Galatians 3:13, Jesus redeems us from the curse by becoming a curse for us. By becoming a curse for us. Why do we need to see this? Why do we need to see the pigs? Why do we need to recognize it? Because there's one who delivers us by being not delivered. If you're a skeptic, and rightly you're challenged with the gospel and with believing in God at all, it's not just how messed up your own heart is, but what you've experienced from others. If that's your hang-up, I don't want to tell you to ignore evil. What I want to tell you is look more closely. Follow it. You cannot exhaustively deal with evil without being led to the most innocent who has ever suffered the most evil. You cannot exhaustively examine evil without going to the cross. It has completely changed civilization. It broke the greatest empire that's ever stretched from shore to shore, from country to country, around the known world. Christianity's suffering, Jesus at the center of it, is the most exhaustive treatment of why bad things happen that you'll ever see. It's the only response to evil that's big enough. You can't advocate for victims unless you grieve Jesus who suffers as a victim, but by his own choice. He is the fullest expression of God's response to evil in the world. Jesus suffers evil. He doesn't just expose it. In the end, what that does for us, and we see it in these last verses, is that Jesus actually, he shows us how we trample evil underfoot as his church. So verses 14 through 20, we see what happens, and the people send Jesus away. Yeah, losing the pigs was costly for the pig herders, but I think there's something else at work too, which is that their world as they knew it was over. They had seen what was behind the scenes. They saw evil. And they saw Jesus' power to end it. And the natural question for everybody in that unclean region watching Jesus do it is, I am too evil to be in this man's presence. And the world that he brings is too powerful, too out of my control, too challenging to everything I love and care about. Friends, I believe we do this too. We would love a Jesus who will deliver us in the easiest way possible with the least amount of complication to our everyday life. But Jesus means to trample evil underfoot, and he means for us to do it with him as his church. So what's the opposite of sending Jesus away? The opposite of sending Jesus away is to fight like Jesus. My question to you this morning, the question to me that I have to answer is, have I been delivered from the spirit of the age, or am I just following the progress of evil? Am I just following along, or am I fighting? New York is a tough place to live. And what we're told is that you are what you earn, that the people who don't earn it are less than, that you need to get while the getting's good, be tough, and never be wrong. The gospel says something else. It says that we can embrace the fact that evil is within our own hearts, and we can fight it. So I want to give you a tough application this morning. We have to attend to the things in our lives that lead to the unraveling of God's good world. Define evil that way, not the, did I do a bad thing? But what's the downstream effect? Am I unweaving God's good world? Am I breaking it? Am I messing it up? When we tell a false story to a client to escape a sticky situation, we're participating in the progress of evil. When we try to get around the building codes to renovate something, to build something, we're contributing to the progress of evil. It's the church's job before everybody else's to weave back together what's been undone. It's the church's job. You're going to have troubles as you seek to do this well. As a matter of fact, let me say it this way. Is it harder for Christians to build a business, renovate a building, support a political candidate, keep a boyfriend or girlfriend without giving your body away? Is it harder to keep friends, attend the best parties, put away enough money for retirement? Is it harder to get good grades without cheating? Is it harder to get into your schools because you live with integrity? Yes, it's harder. The good news I have for you this morning is that living the life that Christ has called us to live is harder. But it's worth it. The Apostle Peter lived in a dangerous, evil time. We want to talk about evil times, friends. There have been evil times, okay? This is evil, there's other evil too. There's evil like Peter dealt with, which was an emperor that was just killing people at will, Christians in particular. And Peter said something in his letter. He said, honor the emperor, which I always found to be interesting. That same emperor is the one that executed him. If Peter was here right now, do you know what? Would he tell us that it was a mistake? Would he say, boy, I thought I could win him over, but I certainly couldn't, right? No. You know what he'd say? He'd say, it was worth it. It was worth it to show what the real dominion is. It was worth it to say what's really true about the world in which we live. And then he would write it in 1 Peter. I want to give you the encouraging words from Peter for those of us who are weary. Look, you're weary. It's hard to live this more difficult life. Here's Peter's advice. Be sober-minded, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. This is pleasant so far. Resist him firm in your faith, knowing that the same kinds of suffering are being experienced by your brotherhood throughout the world. So far, how you feeling? As a matter of fact, before this, Peter says, when the terrible thing happens to you, when the suffering strikes, don't be surprised as something odd were happening to you, right? It's one of my favorite benedictions. But it doesn't stop here. Here's where it goes. After you've suffered a little while, the God of all grace, who has called you to his eternal glory in Christ, will himself restore, confirm, strengthen, and establish you. To him be the dominion forever and ever. In other words, he says, you want to know what a dominion is. You're going to know it when you see the suffering people, my suffering people, restored and established. You're going to see it when they're delivered from evil. And you know what? You see it in the man who's delivered here. I want you to consider one thing as we close. Jesus went across the waters, faced demons and a demon storm on the Sea of Galilee, went across, was confronted again by demons into an unclean place among unclean people to make one missionary. Why? There is no better picture of the gospel than what this man did. He went everywhere he had formerly lived, every place where the kids threw rocks at him, every place where he was rejected, betrayed, unloved. He went into every one of those places and he said, look what Jesus did. Jesus is Lord. Every one of those places of rejection was recolonized. It became a place of deliverance, became a place of grace. That's how you trample evil underfoot. You go in God's grace, embracing your own culpability, pleading the blood of Jesus, and you follow him into that difficult life. And in the end, you're restored and confirmed and safe.